Welcome to the Matt Waller Podcast, where we look at success at the intersection of technology, logistics, supply chain, retail, and CPG, also known as the retail value chain. I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, New Road Capital Partners. New Road invests in proven technologies, services, and products that serve unmet needs in the marketplace. They look for companies in supply chain and logistics, as well as consumer-oriented companies. For more information, go to newroadcp.com. I would also like to disclose that I am a strategic advisor to New Road. I'd also like to recognize podcastvideos.com for the services they provide for these podcasts. I'm very pleased with their services. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. Welcome, everyone. I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast today. We're talking to Dan Johnston, who's the CEO and co-founder of a company called WorkStep. And many of you out there listening know that workforce turnover, especially frontline workforce, there's a lot of problems with it today. High turnover, people don't show up, people aren't happy. And we're going to be talking about a solution today, WorkStep, that really can reduce turnover and improve employee satisfaction on the front line, which is where we need it. It's a really innovative solution. I think you are really going to like it, but it's a way to really understand what's going on the front line, predict what's going to happen, and then close the loop and make decisions using their analytics that would really improve the lives of these people on the front line. So I think you're going to enjoy it. A little bit more about Dan. He is, like I say, he's co-founder and CEO of WorkStep. But he has really, since its inception in April of 2017, and that gives you an idea. So he founded the company before the pandemic, and then there was the pandemic. And so now we know this is even more important than ever. I think it's probably more important now than it was in 2017 when he spearheaded the company's mission and leveraged his experience in product management and entrepreneurship to build this. Dan's journey in entrepreneurship began much earlier. From June of 2014 to June of 2016, he served as the group product manager for learning services at Chegg Inc., a direct transition from his role as co-founder of InstaEDU. InstaEDU is an online platform that connects students with qualified tutors, and they were acquired by Chegg in 2014 after almost 3 years in operation. So that was a great experience for Dan to prepare him for what you're about to hear about shortly. Before InstaEDU, Dan co-founded Cardinal Scholars in January of 2011, an in-home tutoring service that matches K-12 students with high-quality tutors from top universities. This venture was also a success and was acquired by Course Hero in June of 2012 after 1.5 years. So the person you're going to be hearing from today, Dan Johnston, is a very seasoned entrepreneur with a success record. And I think you'll really get the feel for that when you hear him describe this solution. He's also a graduate of Stanford University, where he earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Management Science and Engineering. He's recognized for his leadership, strategic planning, and entrepreneurship skills, all of which contributed to his achievements in the tech industry. So stay tuned. I think you're really going to like this. Dan, thank you so much for taking time to visit with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I'm excited for the conversation.
Well, hey, Dan, let's start, if you wouldn't mind, by just telling us a little bit about WorkStep's mission and how it serves clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So the mission at WorkStep is to make the frontline a better place to work. And I'll explain a little bit more about sort of where that came from and what it means to me and to our company. So based on my experience working in both retail and supply chain roles, we saw a labor ecosystem that was increasingly challenging for the frontline worker to find the right fit job, gain the skills they need, retain in their roles, build new skills, grow in their career, and ultimately find career and life satisfaction. And so when we set out to build a company, what we really asked ourselves is, how could we use technology to build an ally for this segment of the workforce that we felt like was increasingly in need of one? A segment of the workforce, the frontline American worker in traditional hourly jobs, a workforce that maybe was underserved by technology historically. And so really from that founding mission of making the frontline a better place to work, we built out a technology platform that we really feel like delivers on that mission, delivers on that value for the frontline workers.
You know, when you think about the frontline workers, especially the hourly workforce, could you share some unique challenges this demographic faces that your solution addresses?
Yeah, I mean, where to begin, right? But when you look at sort of cross-sectional data around the various aspects of job satisfaction, and you compare hourly or frontline workers with desk or salary work counterparts, you see meaningfully lower satisfaction across basically all of the relevant work themes, whether that be satisfaction with compensation, benefits, recognition, relationship with your manager, access to career growth opportunities. And so, of course, there are sort of micro challenges like scheduling or flexibility or, compensation sort of allowing you to make ends meet. But structurally, this workforce has often really been both underappreciated by their employer and also mostly unheard in terms of what specific challenges they're facing and how we as companies and we as people leaders can ultimately make our organizations a better place to work for this sort of heartbeat of our companies, which is the frontline workforce that ultimately makes, moves, and delivers everything that our end customers buy.
So, when I'm talking to earlier stage companies, I'm talking about a broad range of companies. One thing I always think of is, an entrepreneur, one of the key things an entrepreneur does is they use resources and technology to gain efficiencies. Mm-hmm. So how does WorkStep's employee engagement software really improve efficiency, either through reduced employee turnover or productivity, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so in short, what we leverage software, data analysis, artificial intelligence, and our team to help companies do is really collapse that distance between the doer of the role and the decision maker who ultimately makes the decisions that impact that person who is executing on the job, right? And in a world where corporate roll-up after corporate roll-up and overnight shifts and over-the-road trucking routes, right? That individual frontline worker, let's say a truck driver, has gotten further and further and further from the person who makes the decision that impacts their scheduling or their routes or when they're home with their family or how their compensation structure works or how they engage with their manager, right? So fundamentally, we believe that there's an opportunity for software to really bring a voice to these frontline distributed teammates and to empower their employers to understand that voice, right? What are the insights that can be derived from employee feedback? How can we connect employee feedback data to business outcome data to understand what parts of the employee experience are actually driving the business outcomes we care about? How can we use the collective wisdom of our organization or even other organizations in our space to know how to act on those challenges in the most impactful way? And then ultimately, how do we show our teammates that we are listening, right? That their feedback has led us to realize an insight, which has led us to take an action, which has ultimately led to a change and ideally an improvement in their experience. And so that's a little bit about sort of the software system that we built. But when you talk about efficiencies, right, just collapsing that distance between doer and decision maker isn't an outcome in and of itself, right? The outcome we drive for large retailers, large 3PLs, CPGs, and other companies that rely on a distributed frontline workforce is ultimately reduced employee turnover, which leads to other downstream outcomes like increasing average productivity, better customer experiences, lower safety incident rates, higher employee morale, which ultimately then sort of cascades down to better bottom line outcomes.
Would you mind talking specifically about how your solution facilitates HR and operations leaders in terms of gathering the actual feedback and taking action, those kinds of things?
Yeah, so I think one of the greatest challenges with sort of historical employee feedback systems, right? Like traditional employee annual surveys, is that it was always really centered as an HR practice, right? The HR team owns a specific survey of a specific population and what is asked, because that's sort of a people problem, and then ultimately shares out insights with the other groups and tries to get them to facilitate action plans and things of that nature. But leveraging modern software, our belief was actually we can bring HR and operations together with sort of equal seats at the table in this process and say, okay, as an operations leader, right, as a store manager or as a district manager or as a VP of stores, right, you have a purview over everything happening with your employees that are ultimately driving the business outcomes. And then you have your HR counterparts that are responsible for sort of all the sort of people side of that experience. Of course, like benefits and compensation and engagement and some of the software components. And really what we've tried to build is a system that really brings these two groups together so that they can collaborate in real time on employee challenges, what's going well for employees, and how they can ultimately work together to most sort of move the employee experience forward in a way that moves the business forward. And so, that can be as simple as ensuring that, minute operational challenges like everything's going well in my role, except I can never find the gloves I need at the start of my shift, right? Can go to the right operations leader who can solve that problem today. Well, maybe the more complex HR specific challenges like my manager is harassing me can go to the relevant HR counterpart. But a big part of, what's possible with a platform like the one we built is really bringing HR leaders and operations leaders together to look at the same source of truth that they co-own and say, how can we partner depending on what challenge we're solving to ultimately help our employees have a better experience at work?
So Dan, data analytics is such a huge part of what your solution entails. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, the modern enterprise, right? A large hospitality chain or quick service restaurant really sits on a treasure trove of HR data that can be massively useful for their organization if they know how to utilize it, right? So really, data underpins everything that we partner with our customers to achieve, right? And that's really simple things like how do you measure the sentiment of your workforce across various themes, overtime across various segments, so you can tell, how to individual at a certain location feel as compared to other similar locations, or new employees versus tenured employees, or employees who identify as male versus female, or whatever your slices and dices are, right? And other simple data sets like, understanding turnover and retention and attendance and productivity, right? Sort of like all the building blocks of the base layers of employee data. But what's more interesting is what you can accomplish with both predictive analytics and artificial intelligence layered on top of those data sets, and critically connecting those data sets, right? Because to speak to predictive analytics, for example, it's one thing to say, my employees are unhappy with benefits. In fact, it's our lowest scoring theme. They're less satisfied this year than last year. So let's focus on that, right? That's sort of a very natural conclusion. But with predictive analytics, you could actually understand, well, what is the correlation between benefit satisfaction or decline in benefit satisfaction and our goals as a company? For example, we're really trying to reduce new hire turnover in our driver population, right? And it might be that actually that benefits dissatisfaction is completely unpredictive of the outcome you're trying to drive, right? Which is new hire retention in your driver population. But there might be something else like job expectation alignment or physicality or manager relationships that is actually driving that behavior. And so what we can do with predictive analytics is tie together employee sentiment data, business outcome data, like employee outcome data, and say, here's what's actually driving these behaviors across these groups, right? And therefore, that's where you should focus your time if you're looking for leverage. And that is really, really, really powerful in terms of ensuring that companies can focus their limited resources on sort of the elements that actually move the needle. And so they don't end up spinning their wheels trying to solve a problem that actually, even if they solve, won't really change outcomes. And then artificial intelligence, of course, can also drive a lot of advanced insights for an organization, right? In terms of understanding sort of what the sentiment is related to various topics, or where employees are having more challenges with a specific topic than they were previously, or really how to tease out sort of deep and specific insights from employees. And so really, when you look at a company with thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of employees, leveraging predictive analytics and artificial intelligence, they can get many, many, many layers deeper in terms of the effectiveness of their employee strategies by leveraging a platform like WorkStep that exposes these advanced data analytics.
So, Dan, once you've used all of these advanced analytics, you then take action, but how do you really close the loop on all of this?
Yeah, so that's, again, thinking about sort of traditional sort of employee listening. Matt, I know it's way back, but I'm curious, when you were leading Mercari, did you do an employee survey in your company? Obviously not a Frontline centric company, but tell me about that.
We did, but keep in mind, this was in the 90s.
Yes.
But yeah, we certainly did, because we grew so quickly. We were at 120 people in a very short period of time. And about 20 of the people were in Fayetteville and Arkansas, and then the rest were in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there was a divide between the D.C. people and the Fayetteville people. So we did a survey, and it was, this was before SurveyMonkey, I think. I literally emailed them. I put a questionnaire together in a spreadsheet and emailed it, and they emailed them back, and my admin compiled it. So it was not very impressive what I did.
And once you compiled the results, how did you close the loop? Like, how did you tell those 120 employees, here's what I learned and here's what we're doing about it?
I talked to the vice presidents that were over each of the areas about it, and asked them to address certain things that I saw within their areas. And again, this was complicated, right? Because we had to manually go in and classify, categorize the responses by discipline and the unit that they were working in. And so then I would talk to some of the leaders of those areas, like the VP of Engineering, VP of Sales, VP of Business Development, VP of Marketing, et cetera. And it's been a long time ago. I don't remember specifically what I came up with, but we did actually make changes, and because we wanted everyone to know, not only did we ask, but we listened and changed. And I think it was effective. Again, the data collection on that kind of thing back then was not good. And then even at the university, leading the Walton College, while I was dean, we had several hundred employees, 8,000 students. I had a lot of direct reports, more than I should have, and I had 3 different boards of advisors for different purposes. Now, at that point, some of our feedback was done through SurveyMonkey or things like that. Actually, my admin, I think she used something else. I can't remember what it was, but it was like SurveyMonkey. And so we wanted to survey the staff in particular, not the professors, not the students, but the staff, because of some issue that was coming up. And again, it still made it difficult to analyze it and put it all together. And that was, just a few years ago. I mean, I stepped back from being dean this summer, so it's not been very long.
Well, I appreciate you walking me through those personal experiences. And my intent there was, I think, to understand that you very much had the right idea, right? Which is that it's not just about listening. It's not just about compiling insights, no matter how advanced or not advanced they are. You have to demonstrate that you are listening, right? You have to close the loop. And the process you went through is sort of pretty standard, which is, right, we're going to look at this at a group level, ideally, and say, okay, engineering, what's going on there, and marketing, what's going on there. Okay, now pull your teams together and say, hey, we heard you across our 15 engineers. You had these general challenges, and here's what we're doing about it, right? And certainly that process is way better than nothing, right? Sort of closing the loop at a group level. What's hard about that process in a frontline environment is how do you bring those 30 stores together, right, to share that out? And how do you reach that employee base and say, hey, in the Western region, we heard you. You're having challenges with, our closing schedules or with the new technology we added to the cash registers, whatever it is. And so what we've built is technology that allows, an organization to close the loop digitally, right? So basically segmenting a workforce based on attributes that include sentiment. So I only want to close the loop with people who are upset about this specific thing, right? In these specific groups or in these tenures, right? And sort of get that message out, be able to see who saw it, right? Who responded to it, and ensure that sort of we're closing the loop at a group level, but in a way that supports a distributed workforce. But I think the thing that was really missing from this broader ecosystem that is really impactful for frontline teammates is loop closure at an individual level, right? So, for example, in your engineering department we're talking about, right? Let's say 60% of folks were upset about delivery schedules, but there was 2 people who were incredibly upset about the quality of their keyboards, right? Now, in your loop closure, you probably don't even mention the keyboards because actually that's just not what everybody cares about, right? But the 2 people who really do care are kind of like, you didn't hear me, right? Like my challenge is the quality of my keyboard. And so what we've done is built this system where when an individual challenge is logged, right, it can be flagged, it can be prioritized, it can be assigned to the relevant leader all quickly. And then you can actually engage with that teammate, respecting their confidentiality, close the loop and say, hey, we've heard you, right? Appreciate you bringing this challenge forward. Here's what we're doing about it if we can do something about it today, or here's how we plan to do something about it, or here's why we can't do anything about it today, but we still appreciate you bringing it forward. And what we've seen is that ability to just make the teammate feel seen is incredibly impactful. And so, in fact, across our customer base, hundreds of large companies, we've seen that the employees who receive a response that high urgency feedback are 28% less likely to leave an organization than the employees who don't receive a response in the next 90 days.
What's the difference again?
28%.
Wow.
So basically, by showing that employee that you are listening, right, that their concern has been seen by the relevant leader, you're dropping their turnover the next quarter by, again, almost a quarter, or a little more than a quarter.
Well, the neat thing about that is you can assign a dollar value to that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to talk about, dollar values, right? Yeah, especially given the labor market that we live in, right? Most logistics companies estimate it costs them anywhere between $7,000 and $15,000 to replace a warehouse worker. Anywhere between $20,000 and $45,000 to replace a truck driver. Anywhere between $2,000 and $4,000 to replace a retail clerk for the most part. And so when you start thinking about tens of thousands of employees turning over at 40 to 120% a year, most companies who make and move physical products are running hundreds of millions of dollars in turnover costs every year. And now what makes me excited, right, is the cost savings. Like, it's nice to be able to build an ROI case with our customers, right, and show them how being a better employer can improve their bottom line, and how really becoming an employer of choice, right, and a better place to work can lead to better business outcomes because they don't have this turnover. But also, it's just the right thing to do, right? Because if you sit on top of 10,000 employees instead of 120, like, you have the opportunity to use technology, to use your position of authority to improve the lives of 10,000 people in a very meaningful way. And for people who spend half of their waking hours working for you, right? And so I think you sort of have one of these rare opportunities in business, especially given the labor market, to do the right thing for the company's bottom line. That's also just the right thing from a very human perspective, which is sort of that double bottom line opportunity, which is maybe by improving these people's lives, we also improve our business outcomes. And that's a really nice thing to have both happen at once.
So Dan, how does WorkStep plan to evolve with the changing landscape of employee engagement and retention in the future?
Yeah, I think, Matt, honestly, the answer sort of starts with what isn't changing, right? Which is that, companies are going to continue to want to have a better understanding of their employee base and a more clear identification of how they can better serve that group, right? Especially as the labor market remains strained. And companies are going to continue to look for technology solutions that can accomplish that in more streamlined ways, more effective ways, in ways that deliver a greater impact with less time investment, right? Like, you described your survey process for 120 people. It sounded painstaking, right? What if it had been 120,000 people, right? So
terrible.
What's the old Amazon adage? Like, people aren't going to want more expensive or slower delivery, right? So, I think generally people are going to want to have a better understanding of specifically how their workforce is feeling, what they should do to impact it, and have all that happen with less effort for their leaders who are already strapped in for time, right? And so knowing what's not going to change, I think, guides what should change for a company like WorkStep and for technology like what we built, right? And so, thinking about that supervisor or that regional leader who is stretched thin for time, right, doing their job but still wants to be a better leader, how do we be even more proactive about bringing insights to them. We think about this as the right insight to the right leader at the right moment, right? So like if you're, we're going to come back to this VP of engineering again, right? Shouldn't have to wait for those results to populate and tell him or her that you have a few people who are having issues with their keyboards. That should be flagged proactively as soon as that becomes a trend, right? And they should get that notified to them, via the tools they're already using, right? It should say, hey, 3 times in the last week, this specific challenge has come up within your workforce. Here's how other departments at our company are solving it, right? So how can we continue to shave that time away, getting the right insight by proactively bringing to the right insight to the right leader at the right moment? We're already on our way there. And then secondly, as it relates to more outcomes with less investment, how do we automate more parts of this process, right? One thing that often happens with employee voice is that there are a lot of sort of the same challenges in different words and in different parts of the company that might have a very sort of stock solution, right? Whether it's a safety issue actually just needs to be moved to a service ticket, right, in a separate system. How do we make that process happen automatically, right? Or if an employee has a question about benefits, how do they get that answer automatically, right? So an HR leader doesn't have to dive in. And then finally, again, circling back to artificial intelligence, we see a world in which this whole ecosystem is much more adaptive. The easiest way to describe this is, instead of asking everybody in a company the same questions once a year, we have very sort of custom methodology where, like a forklift operator on their 7th day gets a much different experience than an office worker who's been there for 10 years, right? But I think we can actually go one step further where, let's say, for example, you provide a set of feedback after your first week on the job. What you are asked and how you are asked it after your first month on the job should reflect what challenges you had or what you were feeling after your first week, and be able to sort of close the loop on, did you see the changes? Have these things improved, right? What has the loop closure on those challenges been? And so really, again, I think broadly what we're thinking is, how do we make this platform more proactive, more automated, and more adaptive to context, with the thesis being that will bring better insights more quickly to the right leaders so they can move on with the rest of their job.
Well, Dan, thank you so much. It was good to see you again. If you're finding value in this podcast, we greatly appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Additionally, following us on Apple and Spotify and leaving up to a 5-star review would be immensely helpful. We welcome any feedback or questions related to the podcast, as well as suggestions for further topics and guests. You can leave your comments on our YouTube channel, and rest assured that I will read each and every one of them. Please also take a moment to check out our podcast sponsors, as they play a critical role in keeping this podcast running. For more information on specific topics, timestamps, or links to articles mentioned during the podcast, head over to mattwallerpodcast.com.